Hello and welcome all to Strength, Global Solidarity to End Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia, presented by the Stephen Lewis Foundation to mark the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Transphobia, and Intersexphobia. I'm Maurice Tomlinson, a member of the board of Stephen Lewis Foundation, and I'm thrilled to be given the role of host for this timely event. I'm also a Jamaican attorney at law, living in Canada, but I'm focused on supporting LGBT liberation efforts across the Caribbean or the African diaspora. These include being the claimant and lawyer in cases challenging anti-LGBT legislation before the highest tribunals in the region, facilitating LGBT sensitivity training for police and human rights training for communities made vulnerable by homophobia, and hosting dialogues with religious organizations to help create a theology of decriminalization. I'm an LGBT consultant with the HIV Legal Network. When I'm not in classes as a student practical nurse, I want to give a big shout out to the Dignity Network, on whose board I'm proud to serve, which mobilizes and helps coordinate Canadian organizations engaged in global LGBT liberation efforts, and some members of whom will be joining today. I also want to acknowledge the work of Global Black Gay Men Connect, on whose board I also serve and is doing great work around things such as Global Black Pride. As an organization based in Canada, the Stephen Lewis Foundation acknowledges that our presence here is a direct outcome of the settler colonial state whose policies of expulsion from the land and cultural genocide continue to impact Indigenous communities today. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action reaffirms that the treaties with Indigenous peoples must be lawfully honored. We are all treaty peoples and are responsible for honoring and upholding those agreements. The Stephen Lewis Foundation also acknowledges that oppressive and inequitable socioeconomic and political systems in Canada continue to perpetuate this legacy of racism, intergenerational trauma, and structural inequality, and that this legacy is directly linked to the disproportionate impact of HIV on Indigenous communities within Canada. We at the Stephen Lewis Foundation are committed to the principles of social justice, equality, and solidarity with our community-based partners as they face the continued effects of the HIV and AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Consistent with these values, the Stephen Lewis Foundation commits to a journey of ongoing learning, reflection, relationship building, and solidarity with Indigenous communities in Canada. Now, just a bit of housekeeping. Today's event starts with the opening remarks that I shall give shortly, and they'll also have remarks from Doug Stollery, and then we'll turn to a panel discussion and a Q&A. If you have any technical issues or concerns, please feel free to use the chat function and send a message directly to the host. At the end of the panel, there will be a Q&A. If you have questions for the panelists, please submit those through the Q&A feature, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us by computer, that is, and at the top of your screen if you're joining on a mobile device, and hear some shuffling in the background, if you wouldn't mind putting yourself on mute while you're not speaking, that would help. Finally, we invite you to participate in today's discussion, which we anticipate will be very lively, through the chat feature. So please feel free to share where you're joining us from and include your reactions and input related to the discussion at hand. Our expectation is that everyone will conduct ourselves respectfully and collectively help to build a space free of homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, as well as other forms of discrimination and hate. As I stated before, I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation at this critical time as we observe the backward lurch of Uganda towards criminalizing sexual identity and people who have been made vulnerable. As the inaugural winner of the David Kato Vision and Voice Award and the first Grand Marshal for Uganda Pride, I made many dear friends in the Ugandan LGBT communities. and I'm distressed at the new legal threats posed to my LGBT siblings in the Pearl of Africa. At the same time, I'm confident in their resilience and strength to meet and overcome this additional challenge to their very existence. We'll hear from some of these friends on the continent and how we can offer the most effective assistance to them at this time. Since 2003, the Stephen Lewis Foundation has partnered with community-based organizations working at the intersections of HIV and human rights on the front lines of the HIV and AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. The Stephen Lewis Foundation's approach to partnership is based in supporting the priorities that community-based organizations identify and being guided by the expertise held at the community level. Over the last 4 years, the Stephen Lewis Foundation has been partnering with 16 LGBTQ organizations in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And these are building hope and solidarity while offering holistic programs and services, including access to HIV testing and counseling, legal services, and psychosocial support. The Stephen Lewis Foundation's Partners in Pride campaign exists to raise awareness, build solidarity, and mobilize the funds necessary to ensure that LGBTQI organizations in sub-Saharan Africa have the funding and support they need to advocate for human rights and to provide holistic HIV and AIDS services to LGBTQI organizations. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce two friends of mine, Doug and Debbie, who will be first giving a short presentation and then leading the Q&A. Doug is a lifelong human rights defender who has earned notable recognition, including the Order of Canada. As pro bono legal counsel, he contributed to a landmark Supreme Court of Canada decision to amend Alberta's human rights legislation to include sexual orientation as a protected class. Doug has served as a director for numerous nonprofit organizations, including the Stephen Lewis Foundation, and recently served as Chancellor of the University of Alberta. He's president of the Stollery Charitable Foundation, which provided key support to launch the Stephen Lewis Foundation's LGBTQI Africa initiative. Debbie is a Black feminist, anti-racist, and social justice advocate with more than 8 years of local and international experience. She's worked in international development with Oxfam Canada, and often with a megaphone in hand, is an active volunteer and organizer for numerous feminist initiatives, including Harmony House Women's Shelter, Planned Parenthood Ottawa, and the Ottawa Dyke March. Debbie is the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity. It's my great pleasure and honor to ask Doug to now share a few words. Thank you.
Thanks, Maurice. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to meet with leaders of 3 community-based organizations to support HIV-positive LGBTIQ communities in East Africa. For me, this was a profoundly moving experience. Through our conversation, I came to have a better understanding of the challenges faced by these communities in countries where same-sex relationships are criminalized. And even the most basic human rights for members of these communities are often neither respected nor protected. I came to have a better understanding of the dual stigma of being both HIV positive and a member of a sexual minority community, where the need to hide your personal identity presents significant physical and mental health risks. Even more importantly, I came to understand the courage, the resourcefulness, the resilience, and the compassion of these leaders and the remarkable impact that their organizations were having in their communities. They know what is necessary to support their communities. What they need is financial support to help them in their work. And this is where the Stephen Lewis Foundation comes in. For the past 18 years, the foundation has been working with community-based partners to respond to the HIV and AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. More recently, Through its Partners in Pride campaign, it has expanded its reach to support community-based partners run by and for the LGBTIQ communities. I'm proud that our Family Foundation was able to step forward as one of the early funders of this campaign. And I'm particularly proud of the impact of the work of the community-based partners supported by the Partners in Pride campaign. I met with these community leaders in Vancouver. They had been sponsored by the Stephen Lewis Foundation to come to Canada to explain the work that they were doing. That work became all the more important with the recent crackdown by governments and police on the LGBTIQ communities in East Africa, which required a number of community leaders to flee for safety. And the Partners in Pride campaign was there to support them and to help them continue their work under these very difficult circumstances. I know that I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Many of you joining today's event have firsthand experience of these circumstances. Many of you are leaders working for a more just society. I thank all of you for your contributions, and I hope that you enjoy the presentations of our panelists today. And now, Debbie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm super glad to be here moderating this event today. I am excited to introduce to you all of the brilliant panelists we have today. So I won't go talking about too much about myself. I think the highlight of today, of course, is the brilliance that each of our panelists have. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them all. So our first panelist is Christopher Nkambwe. Christopher is a multiple award-winning community leader and human rights defender, originally from Uganda. She came to Canada as a refugee after facing persecution as a trans woman and an LGBTIQ activist. Christopher founded the African Centre for Refugees in Ontario to support LGBTIQ refugees, and she is on the advisory committee of the Positive Space Initiative for the Ontario Council for Agencies Serving Immigrants. She is currently the board chairperson of Royal Raise Initiative Uganda, an organization that supports vulnerable LGBTQ individuals in Uganda. Next, we have Rin Lawrence. Rin is a deeply committed teacher, human rights defender, and advocate for gender diversity and inclusion in education. Throughout his career with Edmonton Public Schools in Alberta, Canada, Rin has supported students and staff through his work with Gay Straight Alliances and Queer Straight Alliances. He is the current chair of the Edmonton Public Schools Local 37 Diversity, Equity, and Human Rights Committee. Next, we have Aaron Mbembe. Aaron is a passionate human rights advocate with more than 8 years of professional experience working with both national and international organizations towards advancing human rights, gender equality, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. He is currently the Associate Director in charge of Policy and Advocacy at Health Development Initiative in Rwanda. Next, we have Kennedy Mwendwa. Kennedy is an advocate for sexual and reproductive health rights, youth empowerment, HIV awareness, and ending stigma. He is a program officer at HIV and AIDS People's Alliance of Kenya, also known as HAPA Kenya. He is also a member of Salty Sika, a network of young people living with HIV, and is the chair of Utawafiti Puwani, an LGBTQ community research group for coastal Kenya. I will note that Kenya will be leaving right after the panel discussion, so he won't be here for the Q&A. And next, we have both Marcus Dokis and Dakota Hong Ross. Marcus is a proud Ojibwe trans man from Dokis First Nation, raised in Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. He is a passionate and educated activist, advocate, and survivor who has an understanding of Indigenous traditional Two-Spirit values and more than 30 years of lived experiences. Marcus has worked to serve Indigenous communities in North Bay and Toronto, Ontario for the past 12 years. Working on the front lines, his experience allows him to offer meaningful support and compassionate approaches to harm reduction. He is the program coordinator of ODI. And joining Marcus today, we have Dakota, who is a Two-Spirit Indigenous leader from the Sagamok First Nation. They currently reside in Toronto, Canada, where they are a ODI member and part-time barista. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. So to get things started, I kind of wanted to, pose the first question to Rin. And Rin, you play a very special role as an educator leading change within the education system, I would say nationally, but particularly in Alberta. Whether it's from supporting youth and gay straight alliances or providing training to some of your colleagues, you're practicing what we like to call at my organization, activism through education, in such an amazing and authentic way. In your opinion, why is education an important space and institution to confront homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination impacting to us LGBTQ youth? And what is the most rewarding aspect of your activism work in schools and in school boards?
What a big question. I believe in education in a fundamental way, as an act, the act of educating, and as an institution. Education as an act is important because many of these exclusionary practices that we are here to talk about today come from a place, in my opinion, of a lack of understanding. And education has the power to change that. By educating others, we not only build empathy, we foster relationships, and we can address unconscious bias. Transphobia, homophobia, and biphobia often come from a place of unconscious bias and sometimes traditional beliefs, but often these are internalized ideas. And by educating anyone, that's students, teachers, parents, community members, about inclusionary practices and the importance of diversity in our schools and the histories of homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia, we can address those internalized ideas, bring them to the forefront, and talk about it, which is what we're doing here today. We can confront them in ourselves, and we can help students and others unpack and confront it in themselves. As an institution, education provides a space. We model what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. We play a role in teaching the next generation of society, and it allows us to establish things like inclusive language, inclusive praxis, and most importantly, feelings of belonging at an early age. We can establish understandings of discrimination, exclusion, and the histories of oppression, why these things persist, and what we can do to combat them. One of the most important things in education for me is the hiring of sexual and gender diverse teachers, which provides them with a safe space within school to be role models for sexual and gender diverse youth who often do not have someone, an adult within their circles, families, or the adults around them that are sexual and gender diverse, that they can see representation of their future. So youth often look to celebrities, which lead unattainable lives often, and are unreachable by our children and our youth. So teachers have the ability to be a significant role model in their lives. And I recognize that education has a ripple effect. Each person that we reach, each person that's here today, then has the tools to reach out and teach others. And I believe that is the importance of educating educators. If I can, and we can, empower teachers, administrators, and school staff to be consistent allies and safe spaces, then we can affect more than one teacher, more than one classroom, which is many more students at one time. The most rewarding aspect of my activism is a very easy question to answer, and that is watching my students come alive. I took a group of my teenagers to a Gay Straight Alliance conference that's held here annually in Alberta. And I watched as my quiet, shy, questioning 17-year-olds became 7-year-olds. They were running and laughing and thriving in an environment where they felt truly safe to be everything that they are. The other major reward, of course, is hearing stories about teachers coming to a session, getting the information, leaving with it, and feeling empowered by it. I get to hear stories of teachers that start GSAs in their schools, that get involved with the local, that talk to their administration, and ultimately support their kids. And that empowerment is fierce and so rewarding to hear. And ultimately, I know that by doing this work, we, everyone here today, we are saving lives. And there's nothing more important than that.
That is beautiful. You actually gave me chills just from everything you've been saying and mentioning. It resonates a lot for me personally in the work that I do in my organization, but then I also kind of put myself back in what I wish I had when I was in high school and in elementary school. I didn't have possibility models like you. And from what you mentioned, watching my students come alive, I mean, I look at myself personally, I was pretty out there as a kid, but I can only imagine what else about me could have come out if I had that opportunity to have a person like you as an educator. So you're doing phenomenal work. And I think it's just beautiful to hear what adult leaders can do to support young people. And I think it ties really well to the next question I actually have for both Marcus and Dakota. You both are in an interesting position today where you're representing an organization that centers on the experiences of Two-Spirit and other LGBTQ+ Indigenous youth. Like Rin, you actually show the important role that adult allies can play in not only being possibility models to us LGBTQ youth, but you're also using your relative privilege to carve space alongside them. So my question to you both, can you share how the relationship between adult leaders and youth leaders actually work at ODI, your organization? And my second question is, what lessons can you share with other adults in the community about showing up and with young people in our movements against homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia?
All right, there you got it. Good morning. Thanks for having us. I'm Marcus Dokis, and with me is Dakota. And so to kind of get into the actual question, it's a very interesting role within ODE, whereas it's been a lot of trial and error, I want to say, in terms of trying to learn how the adult piece can really fit in without taking away from the youth space. So that's something that we've really tried to maintain over the years because we're a grassroots group. So we don't try to provide like a hierarchy, and also we follow in with our Indigenous teachings that we've been provided along the way to share that with the youth that we work with, and hopefully inspire them to find their own voices. I was sharing with Dakota this morning, it kind of is off of what we agreed to speak about, but it came up and what the question is actually. ODE started out as a project in the beginning of all of the voices that they had been working with, Two-Spirit Indigenous homeless youth in Toronto, and they were called Forgotten Voices back then. And so what we are now is ODE. Most people know us as Remembered Voices. And so the adult partnership within ODE usually turns out to be, we have a group of mentors who sit on our panel or whatever you want to call it, and we guide the group from behind the scenes without taking up that space, while trying to, we have that experience, right, of living homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all those types of experiences already. So what I try to do is just use my own experiences on a level that is relative to them, and bring that piece of like actually listening to them and not trying to tell them what I think they need, what they need to do, or what they need to be, or how they need to say it. I try to hold the space for them to be able to speak to us, to let them know what they need, and then us try to figure out a way to make that space for them. And I'm actually just going to kick it off over to Dakota to see if they can share some information, because Dakota was actually a previous ODE member of ODE. And also then, because of the type of mentoring that they might have received along the way, we'll find out, they eventually became ODE program coordinator for a short time there. So I just want to pass it over to Dakota to get that view.
Hello, everybody. Well, as Marcus has stated, I have been a member of ODE myself for a few years, and then made my move to help ODE as working as the peer mentor, and for a short while the program coordinator. So ODE just being in its unique situation on that end. It's definitely a, how would I word this well enough? We have to learn to adapt fairly quickly, because just given our own situation on that, because like a lot of the people we deal with are a lot of at-risk LGBTQ Two-Spirit youth as well. So like there is not really at that point a set goal to help them in a specific way, because not everyone has that situation, because like, as I said, not everyone has access to online resources, phones. So like, just even with the goal of ODAY was to offer those services in whatever way possible, whether it is just mainly to do with just communications as well, because that has been a challenge in the past as well, keeping on open communication. And it also was as I guess an employee for ODAY, it was definitely a trying experience, more out of the fact that it was different for me because I come from a small town, but like I was able to bring that into a certain degree because there are a lot of our youth that do come from smaller towns, smaller cities. And like, it's a hard adjustment, especially when not everyone has experienced a very, I wouldn't say extreme degree of homophobia and all that, but like just moving to a city in general has proven its challenges on that end. What can I say on that? And like, even how would I even word this? For Odedo, like, I think it's just a matter of treating our groups like family, and I think that's the one thing that has worked for us the best.
Yeah.
As like, there's gotten to a point where, especially for the at-risk youth, there's very little people that we can actually trust. So like, just having that little notion of like familial connections, or just even just some connections in general, because like, how would even, it's just the little things that matter on that end. Sorry, there's not much that can come to mind at the moment.
Something
Marcus
that I can
has already said quite a bit about it too. Something
I can think of, Dakota, in the past that has been done is some of the program coordinators in the past have offered up spaces, say go into 519 and sharing whatever little stuff that they know about, like experiencing homophobia or transphobia or even biphobia. We've seen that in our groups that people talk about it when they come to ODAY. And so what ODAY is like, we create, like Dakota said, is this family space where, you know, everybody can come in, you're all welcome, you know, it's for Indigenous, however we're identifying, you know, Two-Spirit, we don't turn anyone away. And we try to meet everybody where they're at in terms of their healing journeys or stuff like that. And that all comes into play. So really, when we're trying to address, we technically unofficially address sometimes these issues, homophobia and stuff. And something that I've learned recently from one of our younger group members is that they hadn't really experienced homophobia. So I was just like kind of shocked by that, because my experiences 22 years ago at that same age was, we didn't have anything near what ODAY is or was and is doing these days, or those role models to look up to. I experienced a lot of just, you know, people in the community, you know, they don't think that they're saying anything huge, but that comment that you think is a joke is actually putting someone in a box, and now they're scared to come out to you because you're no longer a safe person. So I ended up leaving my hometown of Sudbury to come to Toronto to escape that stuff, and then to come to find out that younger youth these days are not experiencing that back home. So that's kind of interesting to me, and I don't know, so maybe something's working. But I don't know if that even answers the question or not, if we took up the time here, so let me know.
No, it absolutely did, because I think, you know, the crux of it is you kind of shared how the relationship works for the older folks and younger folks at ODAY, but then also like the lessons that are learned. And I think from basically what you said, you know, you folks are listening to young people, which that is often a lesson I try to let other generations know. And I'm sure, Rin, you know, the importance of like listening to young people to figure out like what is then the need that you can bring as that adult person who's afforded relative privileges based off your role, your position, and even community, and bringing those changes alongside them. And I think it's beautiful too for you folks, how you're looking at family connection and building that relationship across generations, in my opinion. And I think that is definitely something that is a reflection of like culture. And I think for a lot of us who not only are queer and trans, but we're also coming from, you know, cultural backgrounds that are different than the like traditional mainstream, we get to bring that alongside us when it comes to building community within LGBTQ spaces, which is beautiful.
I actually want to share this, Dakota. Dakota has been involved with us for a long time. And so their mom also has been, involved with ODE in some little small shape ways and forums, right? But Dakota's mom actually commented on one of our ODE Facebook posts recently about like thanking ODE for keeping their son safe while they couldn't, right? So it was just really heartwarming to know that even though some of our youth are running from homes that they don't want to be near, there are mothers and parents out there that they don't know where they end up. And if they at least end up at ODE, they know that they're being taken care of in some sort of way, or at least being looked out for by an entire community of Two-Spirit Indigenous folks in Toronto. So I just wanted to share that with you, Dakota. I don't know if you saw that ever or not, but, and then going back to the whole, what you had just said, Debbie, miigwech.
That actually is really beautiful. I'm trying not to cry. I love that, actually. It's beautiful. And you, on top of that, you mentioned something too about like learning, where like young folks are telling you what they're not experiencing and how different it is from you. I think one important lesson in like building that solidarity across generations is it's a mutual learning experience. I think as educators or as people who are working on the front lines and peer support, you're learning from young people too. And the lesson, I think, is that the efforts and the work of the generations before, we're seeing the reward in younger generations. And I think that's the most beautiful thing in the work that I think us who are working with young people, we get to see happen in real time. And it's awesome. So thank you for what both of you are doing with ODE. Awesome. So my next question is for Christopher. Christopher, when we first spoke, you mentioned the importance of telling your story. How homophobia, transphobia had impacted your life in Uganda and drove you to come here to Canada. My question to you is twofold, of course. From your experience, can you share what impact anti-LGBTQ+ discrimination is actually having at the community level in Uganda? And for those of us who are doing this activism work here, either in Canada or in other parts of North America or in Europe, what are some lessons in solidarity that you think we should learn, either from your experience or the experience of your family and colleagues back home? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. As I give my presentation, I will not base only on Uganda, but I will base on Africa because homophobia is not only in Uganda, but also across Africa. And today we are in to celebrate the commemoration of the IDAHOBIT. And for me, it is very important that it was the day that the World Health Organization scrapped homosexuality on the mental disorders, on the list of mental disorders. To me, I was impacted in a way that as a trans woman, we are the faces of homosexuality in Africa. Once they see you like you behave like a woman and yet you're a man, you are seen as someone who is promoting and who wants to recruit people into homosexuality. First and foremost, the impact that it had on me was like there is short life expectancy. At any time of the time that you're living, you are expecting to be beaten, to be killed, to be imprisoned for the rest of your life for promoting homosexuality and for who you are. Even if you are not at the margins of promoting homosexuality, you are seen as someone who wants to really, really promote homosexuality in the country. Then also there is imprisonment. As we are doing our work as activists back home, people really want to see you in prison because you are someone who does not really, really deserve to live because of your sexual orientation. Then there is also mental illness. These homophobia attacks really, really bring about so many challenges like mental health, depression, which leads to health not to be at ease, as we are doing our work. Then also we have these forced migrations. Like personally myself, as I was doing my activism work, I was attacked and threatened to be killed or imprisoned for the rest of my life for promoting homosexuality, yet I was doing activism work to support other group members in the LGBT community. why do we do this work back home? We really want to help these other people in the community to get services. When we don't support them with services, people will die, especially in the health sector. If we are not creating awareness of HIV/AIDS in the community, yet we are seen as people who are most at-risk populations across the world, people are going to die because of the poor service delivery that is caused by homophobia attacks and discrimination. Then there is unemployment. I'm giving this on a personal basis that I'm a journalist student who graduated from a university from Uganda, and I was denied employment because I'm a trans person, and so I decided to drive myself into activism from 2007 until now, where I can see that I'm doing the passion of my life and supporting and advocating for LGBTQ people back home. Then there is human rights violations caused by the discrimination and homophobia attacks. During this COVID-19 pandemic era, it has been so worse back home in Uganda, whereby the human rights of LGBTQ people were violated in their peace, and it came to a time where they came to raid a shelter, a shelter which could host like about 30 people who had been sent away from their homes for their sexual orientation. Then also that brings to family denials. Once we are denied back home, our parents deny us for who we are, then we have to find a group of people who really accept us as who we are as a group. That is when the human rights violations comes in, and police and uniformed people come in to raid, and they say that this is a group of people again who are promoting homosexuality in the country. Then there is drug addictions, this mental health, these homophobia attacks lead to drug addictions. When you have nowhere to go, you have no one to support you. That really forces us to at least have a bad way of living lives, which is not good in our communities. Then there is stigma and discrimination, which leads to improper ways of living in the community. It does not unite us as a community to continue to live as one community in Uganda or in Africa. Once anyone is affected, an LGBTQ person is affected, it doesn't mean that it is him only or her, but also the entire community. The entire world is also affected by the homophobia and transphobia. That is why we are here to celebrate or to create awareness about the impacts of homophobia. Then about the lessons that one can take is, as I will give that to myself, an example to myself, that I'm a brave person. Back home, I used to work under harsh conditions because of the laws that do not favor our working. But when I came here, I thought that there is still need of me to advocate for people back home and here. And in a period of 4 months, when I was still a refugee without even any document here, I tried to register the African Center for Refugees in Canada, which organization is really supporting LGBTQ people from the African continent who come in here as refugees. Then empathy. I feel really have much energy to stand in for the people who are still outside there facing homophobia attacks. Take a good example of Kenya. Recently, some people raided the Kakuma camp and bombed it, whereby we ended up losing a life. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Trinidad, who was also an activist, who was also supporting people to see that they are getting proper service delivery in those camps. Then also challenging societal stereotypes. We are seen as people who are not of no use, but if we engage in challenging these harmful stereotypes to prove to the world that what LGBTQ people are, some people who can really do good things, who can really promote other people's health, who can really stand in solidarity with other people. And like an example is that when last year about the Black Lives Matter protest, I personally organized the first LGBTQ refugee Black refugee Black Lives Matter protest stand with other organizations coming together in solidarity to fight for other people, So that is the lessons that I really, really want other people to also learn. And also, I urge the donors, these international donors, to kindly continue funding the projects that beat homophobia. Like when I was still in Uganda, when I was attacked, I ran to Sexual Minorities Uganda, that umbrella that unites LGBTQ organizations in Uganda, for support. If it wasn't for the funding that is given to these organizations, you never know, I would have lost my life, So they are giving me relocation, giving me money for, taking good care of myself and my partner. Then also, the collaborations and partnerships with other organizations. That's why we are here. We have different organizations here and who are standing in to advocate for the end of homophobia discrimination in the LGBT community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I think just from hearing your own story about what's happening, not only in Uganda, but all throughout the continent, it's an important lesson that I think resonates with me as a first generation Ghanaian Canadian who was born and raised in Canada, but is very, very, very connected to her roots back home in Ghana. And as a queer lesbian woman, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned across borders. And I think through the work that you're doing, you're showing what it looks like to even be here in Canada and still advocate and organize alongside people. And I think that lesson that you shared on empathy, in my opinion, I agree wholeheartedly. That is it. That is what guides our solidarity work across movements. It's what guides our solidarity work even within, LGBTQ spaces. So many of you are speaking from different perspectives, and it's our empathy, which we use as a standpoint on shared experience, that allows us to show up for other people. And I think that's a beautiful lesson. And I hope it's one that all of us take with us. So thank you so much, Christopher. Kennedy. We were just hearing from Christopher, and we learned not only the importance of sharing personal stories, but also lessons on empathy when it comes to kind of creating solidarity across movements for us LGBTQ people. IDAHOBIT is recognizing, some major changes, and there have been some that we've seen globally, but of course, there are still a lot of things that need to be done, and there's still a lot of stigma that exists that is marginalizing LGBTQ people. For you, I'd like to know what are some lessons that you'd like to share from your own personal experience navigating homophobia, and what role do LGBTQ organizations play in challenging stigma and then also fostering community?
Hey, Debbie, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm glad to see everyone else in the room. As you introduced me, I'm Kennedy. I work with the HIV and AIDS People Alliance Kenya. Well, basing on the topic today, I would really love to share that basing on my story, earlier you've introduced me coming from part of the Autistic Kika, which is the network of young people living with HIV. I've been very vocal when it comes to positive, living positive, and also an HIV champion. Currently, I would love to say that what I've seen change the society is continuous solidarity among us, the LGBTI people in Kenya. The existing of the network of LGBTI in Kenya, when there's an issue in any different part of the country, Kenya will come together and address it as activists, as advocates, as friends of the community. That solidarity has changed the attitudes of people, and continuous sensitization has been very helpful when it comes to changing the attitude of the people. Sometimes people, before sensitization, people will tell you it's out of ignorance. Some people will tell you it's out of lack of knowledge, that they didn't know homophobia leads to, let's say, HIV infection, leads to death, leads to depression, mental health instabilities. So this is itself, it makes us come together and change their mindset. And we've seen people who are very homophobic, who led homophobia, are right now speaking for the community, because we bring them close and we try and change their minds and make them understand who we are, where we're coming from, the struggles, and why it's important for us to change attitudes. Well, I'll say where I work also, I've seen the importance of having a wellness center, for example. Hapa Kenya has been working with SLS for the last more than 3 years. And the continuous support as seen as acquire a psychosocial counselor. Mental health is an issue among the LGBTI people. So this continuous support from different partners and donors has seen us save lives of people who are of my kind, who don't have a place to turn to. So I would say having such a space, it's what the society, what the global needs to think about. The LGBTI persons need to be safe, need to have a place of solace, need to have they need to have that that space to converse, to address our issues. And without further ado, I would really want to say I'm really grateful because in this platform I'm here today, I would say homophobia still exists, and I'm sad to say that today because just yesterday, Upper Kenya has lost the community paralegal who was the advocacy officer who was killed brutally in his house. We knew about it there just yesterday morning. So still, this tells us that homophobia is still here with us and something needs to be done. And what can be done is support of organizations and networks working towards ending and reducing homophobia needs to get more support. We need to have continuous support. We need to have global conversations regarding homophobia, and also putting our governments to accountability when it comes, like for example, right now, I'll tell you someone was killed and still it's perceived as the LGBTI organizations are the ones pushing for, for interrogation and investigations take place. Like the police are not even taking it like as an important thing. So it saddens me because the reality is homophobia and transphobia still exists, but this doesn't mean we'll give up. We are not giving up. We're going to be strong for our community members, and that I think is the most important thing that we need. The solidarity, the coming together, and having a hope. And at the end of the day, we're going to change the society attitude. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Kennedy. I wanted to say thank you for being here and sharing not only your story and the work of your organization on educating people on not only what your organization is doing, but educating people on the ground with regards to changing their views on homophobia and transphobia. But you're doing this while healing and grieving. And so I wanted to let you know that my thoughts are with you and your community and your organization. And we really, really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. So thank you. I just wanted to remind folks before I ask Aaron his question, that if folks do have questions at all for any of our panelists, you can go right ahead and add them into the Q&A function that if you're on a desktop, it'll be on the bottom of your screen, but if you're on a mobile phone, on the top. We'd love to hear if you have any questions for anyone. They can be either directed to everybody or to an individual, so don't hesitate to ask. So Aaron, my question is for you. We just heard from Kennedy, I think a very beautiful story about the important role that organizations can play in challenging stigma in communities and fostering a sense of home through solidarity. I know you're leading this exact work in your role at Health Development Initiative. Can you share what HDI is doing to support other community-based organizations? And why is solidarity amongst other community organizations an important factor in building capacity?
Yeah, thank you very much, Debbie. Allow me first of all to thank organizers of this conversation. I think it really happened at the right moment when we are experiencing a step back in terms of respecting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights of LGBT rights globally. And of course, this is also happening here in Rwanda. And my organization is working in joint collaboration with other community-based organizations, of course, to try to improve the situation on the ground through advocacy, training, and other initiatives. And coming back to the question about the work HDI is doing, I wanted to say that since the last decade, my organization has been at the forefront advocacy, advancing human rights of LGBTI in Rwanda from both health and human rights perspective. But first of all, let me also elaborate more on the issue that these organizations, especially community-based organizations of LGBTI, are facing in Rwanda. One of the challenging issues is related to the registration process of community-based organizations. In Rwanda, we have around 15 CBOs, and some have been operational since 15 years ago. But so far, only one organization was able to secure the registration before the competent authorities. This, of course, is associated somehow with the cultural and religious belief that homosexuality is immoral and a Western agenda, and it is somehow also limits this will sometimes to grant this registration, and which affects the operation we see, the operation of these organizations, because at the end, they don't have access to financial resources for them to run their activities, for them to run their organizations, and sometimes they don't also have means to trigger some advocacy initiatives. So what are we doing at HDI to address this issue of registration? We are currently hosting in our offices 10 community-based organizations that we support with offices where they can work from. And we keep also supporting them in the process to obtain registration. And we have had some organizations that were able to receive the temporary registration. But you understand that the temporary registration expires after 1 year. It requires the organization to continue the process to obtain the legal personality. So currently we are hosting the organizations, and since we started these initiatives, we have seen some organization really getting the registration, the final registration, one organization, sorry, and the organization now is having its own office, and they are starting to access their own financial resources. And we continue, of course, to provide technical support. My organizations, to respond also to the issue of stigma and the lack of friendly services to community members at our health centers here. HDI has started 2 centers in the town of Kigali, where we provide stigma-free and friendly services to members of the community. But for HDI, we look at these centers from 2 angles. First of all, the centers are model to show to the government that it is possible to have stigma-free and friendly services which respond correctly to the need of this of our community members here in Rwanda. And the second is our centers are used also as a space to meet community members, to hear from their problem, which allows at the end to identify advocacy issue that we advance regularly with authorities through our interface meetings we use to organize, where we meet local authorities together with leaders of community, leaders of LGBT community-based organizations to jointly reflect on what should be done to address those issues. And in our centers, we provide psychosocial support, including counseling on HIV. And I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the support of SLF in starting the program to support members of the community who are affected by the use of drugs, where we provide these counseling services, but also organize self-help groups where they can meet to discuss their issues, to provide mutual support. And this was a pilot phase, and we have seen the demand increasing of members of community who need to access these services. And at our organizational level, we are also reflecting on how we can expand these services. To respond also to the issue of access to finances that I mentioned earlier, my organization is organizing what we call non-discrimination fund, which is a small fund, and we invite community-based organizations to compete on the annual basis, and they get a small fund that allows them to organize small activities. And we see this as an exercise that allows them, first of all, to have experience in fund management, to have also the courage to compete for grants, so that in the future they can also be able to apply for other donors. And we have seen since 2 years ago, since we started 2 years ago, some organizations now have started to apply for other bigger grants outside of our organization. And in that perspective, we started what we call a self-help groups. Currently in Rwanda, we have 10 self-help groups where these community members meet on monthly basis to provide mutual support, as I said earlier, but also to collect and document cases of human rights violations that happen in the community. So these cases are collected with paralegals from the community that we trained on how to collect these cases. And last year, we were able to collect around 36 cases of human rights violations. Sorry, it was in 2019. And those cases allowed us to come up with a shadow report that was submitted to the Human Rights Council in the perspective of the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. And the good news, this report, it was the first of its kind, submitted by 13 community-based organizations in Rwanda of LGBT, and it was the first report ever submitted focusing mainly on the rights of LGBTI people in Rwanda. And we get a very good feedback from states that reviewed Rwanda. A number of recommendations we suggested were taken into consideration and addressed to the government. And currently, we have started a conversation with the government of Rwanda through the Ministry of Justice on how some of recommendations would be implemented, of course, with the participation of community-based organizations, and what would be the role also in improving the environment here in Rwanda. As I said, HDI is an organization using a human rights-based approach. We understand that the empowerment of community members is very important. That's why we organize a number of trainings on human rights to ensure that community members are aware of their rights and are able to claim their rights when they are violated. And since we started this, we have seen also cases where community members would go before local authorities or security organs to claim for the respect of their rights. And at the same time, we also contribute in building the capacity of local authorities for them to know and meet international human rights obligations according to commitment Rwanda has made. So in brief, that's what we are trying to do as HDI to support the movement in Rwanda. And coming back to the question regarding the role of solidarity, if I would say, in why solidarity amongst the other community organizations and an impact factor in building the capacity. I wanted to mention here that one of the challenges we are facing in Rwanda is the selective character of civil society organizations when it comes to the human rights issues of LGBT. You will have many organizations claiming to advance human rights, but when it comes to issue of LGBT, you don't seem want to join. They don't want to be seen, identified, advancing human rights of LGBTI because of the same understanding that homosexuality is an immoral, and and a Western agenda, it is different from the Rwandan culture. So this position of a number of civil society organizations, and some are really strong here on the ground, reduce considerably our advocacy strength when it comes to the engagement with authorities on a number of issues affecting LGBT. We see our voices reduced because at that time we realized that there is two voices, a voice of organizations that are pushing towards the improvement of the environment and other organizations that are branding the conservation of the culture. And sometimes it became really difficult. Another issue is about the legitimacy of community-based organizations here in Rwanda, because an organization which is not registered has challenges also to engage with local authorities in advocacy issues because they are not recognized. They don't have a mandate. They are unknown. And this also affects the movement of LGBT in Rwanda. So I see solutions at the three levels. First of all, I think there is a room to continue providing support to LGBTI community-based organization by providing mechanism allowing even non-registered organizations to access finances for them to be visible on the ground doing the work, but also to build internal capacity and proceed, of course, with the registration process. I also see the opportunity to support joint initiatives of community-based organizations, because what we are seeing here on the ground, we don't yet see CBOs of LGBT coming together with one voice, working together, and implementing sometimes activity together. So that's missing. And the there is a room to encourage them through the support we provide, to encourage organizations that are working together in order to increase the strength and to have one voice from community members. So at the level of the movement, there is a need to continue strengthening LGBT movement in Rwanda to ensure that there is a coordinated movement that has one voice, that works together, and that raise these issues of violence that we used to see together, so that they can also have credibility before the competent authorities. At the third level, I think there is a need to approach as well these community or civil society organizations that are not comfortable working on issues affecting human rights of LGBTI. Because at the end, we need to let them understand that human rights are one, are indivisible. Human rights are universal. You can't divide rights. You can't give some rights prevalence over other human rights. We should advance human rights as one. So there is a room to have this conversation, and HDI has started. It is hard, of course, but we have seen a progress where sometimes organizations that were opponents yesterday, okay, are not yet allies, but sometimes they say, okay, please advance those issues. We are not coming to interfere, but we are not yet comfortable to join this conversation. So this gives us the courage to pursue the work, to continue engaging these social organizations. And from the Rwanda point of view, I think there is a hope. There is a hope when you look at our leadership. There is a commitment to see what should be done to improve the situation. And when you look at how these recommendations from the Human Rights Council was received here in Rwanda, there is a hope that if civil society organizations came together jointly with one voice, we can make lines moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate it. And what really stood out in what you mentioned is the importance of what your organization is doing is to support the capacity of other organizations to not only help each other and support each other, but also to provide funds, which I think is an integral part in solidarity building as well. So I really appreciate it. I am keeping a look at the time, and we did just conclude the panelist portion of the conversation. And so I kind of want to just thank all of our panelists for sharing a little bit about the work that you do and the importance of solidarity across all of our movements. And I think these conversations like this are crucial, not only to show the importance of us all joining forces to fight the same fight for change, but then also being able to kind of share strategies and learn tactics from each other. So I'd like to thank you all for doing that. And I know that I see Maurice has turned on his camera, and I invite Doug to do the same while we move into the Q&A section. So I'm going to look at what we have from what was been asked. And I think some of these questions are directed to people, some are not. So based on how they're framed, I might position them or present them to certain people. But one question that came in from a person named Hilda, considering the great need for access to medical care and health for LGBTQ communities, my question is, what are the barriers in accessing medical health, and what more work needs to be done to provide such services to LGBTQ people? Don't know if there was anyone who wanted to answer that. And maybe we'll have one person answer a question each just because of time.
Let me go.
Sounds
About
good.
the barriers in accessing medical health, I'm relating now to Uganda as a country where I come from. I know what really the barriers are. First and foremost is the funding. The funding to these people who are donating to health institutions back home are little. And also this gives them the chance of nowhere to get access to buy the medical equipments, the medicines that really need to be put in the medical facilities back home. Then also, I put this to also us as individuals. The facilities are very far, whereby you need to move long distances to go and pick medications. Then also the low self-esteem in the community and the stigma and discrimination in the health facilities back home. So many people back home, the medical practitioners are not aware of the existence of LGBTQ people. So when you go in for medication and you are a trans person, you identify as a gay person, you are really discriminated and denied services for who you are. Then what needs to be done is continuous funding for these organizations that are really supporting LGBTQ people. Then also the orientation of health workers about the existence of the and the creating awareness of our existence in the communities around our communities. Then advocacy at its best must to be done to create the visibility of the LGBTQ people in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. So this question came from Elizabeth, and I'm going to direct it to you, Rin, if that's all right. So Elizabeth says, as we promote solidarity and collaboration among the widely diverse 2S LGBTQIA+ and ally organizations, how do we acknowledge and respect particular experiences and perspectives and avoid power struggles and hierarchies of oppression in this urgently and critically needed justice work?
Gave me a hard one. Well, I guess they're all hard questions, but you know, I read this question and I thought, yes, absolutely. This is one of our biggest things to address. And I think for me, my response to this is it always comes down to relationships and positive relationship building. That's between organizations, but that's between people. We build trust and we build fostered effective relationships through dialogue, that'd be generative dialogue, collaborative dialogue. And I think, yes, we have organizations, yes, we have power structures, but they are facilitated by someone. There are people behind those organizations, and how do we build relationships between them? By building relationships between the people. And there's a concept that I have been engaging in recently called authentic curiosity. And this idea of truly wanting to understand, we already discussed the concept of empathy, truly wanting to engage with another organization, another person, build relationship there, and how can we work together? And I think, you know, we have wonderful panelists here today that are coming from all parts of the world and all different organizations, and knowing that we are all working toward the same thing. And I think that is the basis of us all moving forward, is that we are all fighting for the same end goal, and recognizing that, building relationships between each of us, and what can we do to support each other. I use the metaphor of the line of linked arms, and how can we stand together? Who do we put where, and working together beyond those power structures, knowing that people support those power structures, and that we do have the ability to affect. Did that answer the question? That's a big question.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Rin. So the next question that I've seen here, I think I'm going to pose this question to both you, Marcus, and Dakota. So Karen asks, I have the impression Indigenous Two-Spirit community members are accepted or are being accepted by Indigenous communities because of the way colonialism and white supremacy have been leveraged to assimilate us into generic Canadian society. So welcoming Two-Spirit community members into our communities is an anti-colonial/decolonial action. How is the attention to colonialism leveraged to welcome LGBTQ+ community members? That is, are LGBTQ people recognized as being traditional members of the community prior to colonization? I know that's a big one. So let me know if you want me to break that down, and I will gladly do so.
The first thing that comes to mind in that whole question, first of all, is there's a lot of really big terms in there. But like, I understand the language, but it's just like, it's a lot to wrap your head around. So just give me a moment while I process my thoughts. Dakota, do you have any thoughts in the moment? Because I have, like, we are being accepted. It's a little bit easier now. Like I said, I am 42 years old. I'll be 43 this July. And when I first came out, I was probably 19 years old, and it was not even because I felt safe. It was just because it was time to. And so thinking back on that, I didn't even know about Two-Spirit. Didn't exist back then, the term Two-Spirit, because it's a more modernized term to describe what was taken away from us through this colonization period, right? And so what I'm seeing anyways, in terms of like with the work that ODAY does, and going back kind of even to the question about the mental health piece, and, you know, how does all this kind of work together? It just comes back to, again, creating those safe spaces where you can share that experience with other people. And then that group then is able to address those factors. So what I feel like in Toronto, specifically, I don't know where they're coming from, we have a very large Indigenous Two-Spirit community here that works very closely together, even though we're kind of all off in our own, doing our own things. And so they're being accepted. Elders are kind of reaching out to more Two-Spirit people to gather whatever knowledge that they don't feel that they're carrying at the moment. Again, just some personal experiences. I don't always feel like we're all always accepted, and we're still having to speak to that, and it's exhausting. So when I think about this solidarity piece, Indigenous Two-Spirit people are still doing a lot of educating about Indigenous Two-Spirit stuff, and it's kind of a lot. So I don't know if I'm even touching close to the thing. I feel like now I'm just kind of like trailing off here.
No worries. I think one part of the question I think is really lovely. And Dakota, if you want to touch on this, I'd love for you to, on like, how was attention to colonialism leveraged to welcome LGBTQ plus community members? And I think that is an important role, because if we look at how the gender binary, homophobia, and transphobia have been introduced to our communities through the process of colonization, I think there's a lot there that we can kind of touch on. And so if Dakota, if you'd like to say anything to that, that'd be great.
Of course. So just given my own experiences on that, I think it's a very kind of mixed bag on that. So I can agree with Marcus on that one. But like just over, I would say very recently, it's been more widely accepted for the LGBTQ community as well. But like from a cultural standpoint though, it varies from tribe to tribe, because I went to several youth conferences myself throughout the province. And like just hearing from other people's perspective is more of a learning experience, because even from my own personal experiences, I wouldn't say it was widely talked about from where I grew up as well, more just due to the said colonialism, sorry. And yeah, I think it's just more out of the fact that I think information is key on that end. But like there's the whole challenge of fighting those beliefs that you're brought up with the colonialism, like homophobia, all that. Like I wouldn't say I dealt with a large degree of that, but like I still dealt with it on some like matters. And I think the distinct problem right now would be just the general lack of communication between like the queer side of things as opposed to like the cis side of things as well. There's always that predisposed judgment on that end. But I think that we have to be at a point where we can actually properly communicate on that end and just keep communication going, because I think that's another huge problem that we've been having throughout the years when dealing with colonialism on that end too. So like it's just a matter of hopefully just taking things more slowly rather than, because like from my own experiences, running headfirst into the problems usually never end well. So like the communication, as I said like a few times before, it's just definitely a huge thing, because like that's the big challenge between a lot of like Indigenous organizations as well. So like, I think if we just slowly worked on that, then things would probably be more, how would I even word this? More manageable on a term for like acceptance and dealing with like current colonialism at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in the chat there too, just to kind of go off, Heidi has been mentioning like skirt shaming teachings. Like there's still a lot to unpack in terms of like the colonialism piece that still comes with claiming a two-spirit identity or Ugukwe, whatever language it is that you've been taught. You know, I've gone through my own sort of skirt shaming, being a transgender person who I've worked in a variety of different settings. So I attended a circle thing for a female one time in a group that I was working in, and the elder that was working asked me to put on a skirt, and I've never worn a skirt my whole life, you know what I mean? And it was definitely not my teaching. And so, you know, I didn't argue with them, but I had to open up the space to have the conversation of, you know, I don't identify that way. That is not how the creator knows me in this circle. And so, no, I won't wear your skirt kind of thing. But then they came at me with their teaching. So I had to respect that space of like, it's what the circle that I was there for that day was not about me. It was about the person that was there. So I had to put aside my own, you know, kind of upsetness about this teaching that this person had. And I used the skirt and put it on my lap. I didn't wear it, but it was just one of those things where I had to compromise to enter this circle in the first place. And so, I mean, colonization is still there. And that kind of goes back to my thing of like, I attend a lot of community advisory councils for like Indigenous stuff where we're always talking about this stuff and nothing like, you know, we're exhausted of talking about it. So how do we move that forward? And then sitting on this panel here is like a perfect example of like, we're all doing the same work and we're doing wonderful work in all these great places. And, you know, just beautiful things to hear, but I still hear the same thing is that we're still like, okay, but now how do we move the work forward? Like we're all doing it. Who takes the torch now and passes it forward and actually shows us some results with this stuff, right? So maybe to sum it up, I think that might be a little bit more along the lines of what we were looking for in terms of an answer there.
I appreciate it. And the Q&A has grown a lot, including in the chat, and I apologize that we don't have enough time to continue the Q&A, but what I would ask maybe for the folks from Stephen Lewis Foundation, if you can kind of compile these questions, maybe this is something to revisit in maybe a different webinar, or we can connect people directly to our panelists who they'd like to ask the questions to. I think the questions are brilliant, and I wish there was more time, but unfortunately, there isn't. So I just wanted to thank our panelists so much for allowing me to ask you questions and hearing your thoughts and your responses. You folks are doing beautiful work, and I'm excited to see what you folks will continue to do and the changes that a collective movement will bring forth. And so I'm going to pass the mic to Maurice to close us off.
Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, Debbie. As you said, this was an excellent intervention and exchange, and there's never enough time to unpack all these things. We just begin to start the conversation. I noted some points which, you know, I'm going to quickly run through, and they're grounded in a philosophy that I've always held, which is people doing liberation work need support, not salvation. And that's what we're seeing here, manifested with the excellent initiatives undertaken by the different panelists. So thank you, Rin, for bringing home the point that, as I've said before as well, you eradicate hate when you educate. That's critically important. Ode, for showing the intergenerational support that can bring change. Very amazing. I'm a gay of a certain age, shall remain unmentioned, but I'm really proud to see, you know, the attempt at intergenerational work that's taking place. Of course, Christopher, yes, touching on the realities of trans people in Uganda, which resonate across the diaspora, and I would indeed say across the world. Trans people are at the forefront of much of the violations and victimization, because it's not easy to hide who you are. So, you know, inspiring work being done there, and the work, the medical interventions and the challenge with medical interventions that you've described are something that I've also seen in Jamaica, the lack of knowledge among healthcare workers, the lack of funding, etc. These all resonate. And from Kenya, Kennedy, thank you for showing that changing hearts and minds through collaboration is possible and achieves remarkable results. People who you thought were not movable are in fact movable. And Aaron, wow, such a comprehensive package of work that you engage in. So many things to highlight there. I like the multifaceted approach and the focus on, as a human rights lawyer myself, encouraging the understanding of the universality and indivisibility of human rights. So groups that are not LGBT, and I've seen that resistance in my own work, where because of the stigma associated with LGBT liberation, you know, other human rights groups don't want to be aligned. But if we can just see that, as I've said before in some other context, misogyny, patriarchy, and homophobia are indelibly linked. Just as one example, because certainly where I come from, the worst thing a man can ever want to be is a woman, because he has, somehow disgraced this epitome of creation, the man. So destroying all those phobias are all interconnected and very critical to the work we're doing. So much excellent discussions took place today and will continue, I'm sure. And I want to end where I began, whereas I said, our aim is support, not salvation. And so I want to ask Healy, my partner in crime, who is the campaign lead of Partners in Pride at the Stephen Lewis Foundation, to share how you can get involved in supporting the work that is being done by the Stephen Lewis Foundation and all these excellent groups. Healy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maurice. And I will be brief because I know we are almost out of time, but I'm going to encourage everyone to stick on until the very end, because I am about to play a very short 2-minute video that you will not want to miss. Thank you all for being a part of this event today. I would also have my own reflections, but I'm going to save those so that we have a chance to see the video. I do want to invite the folks who are here. If you're not working in a community-based organization right now that's addressing these issues, if you want to find out how to get involved, if you want to show global solidarity, to learn more about Partners in Pride, at the end of this event, you'll be automatically taken to our Partners in Pride website page, which will tell you more. You'll see there the video I'm about to show you, which you can share on social media. And you can, of course, donate. My colleagues will be sharing the link for that. They're also sharing links to all of the partners that participated today, so you can learn more about their organizations and how to get involved there. But we'd invite you to donate to Partners in Pride, become a monthly donor. If that's not something that's possible for you at this point, you could organize a fundraising event. We have online fundraising pages. You could do something fun and get friends and family to support. And of course, you can help us raise awareness, help us do education in communities. If you'd like to host an event, if you'd like to have me or someone else come and speak to your organization about Partners in Pride and about the work of LGBTIQ organizations in sub-Saharan Africa, we would love to do that. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and play this short video for you, and then that will wrap up our event.
Well, after all the work, the bashing, Well, after all the work, the bashing, the pressures, the emotional labor and everything, one wonders what keeps me going, what keeps the community going. And my answer to that is love. Love for the work, love for the community, love for a partner. Whether you've been, detained by police and mistreated, and you're able to, break through those walls, those bars, and walk out and find a community waiting for you, they're there because of love. When you get home, and either it's your sister or your brother or your partner, you're only strong because there's love. And what keeps the community together is love. And love is empowering. Love is something that no homophobe, no transphobe, no hate group can take away from us. And love is power. Love is the power that is keeping us going.